There were players that I avoided in the fantasy basketball draft season, and these ones did not work out. Michael Bolton, you always work out.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and unlike Postman Pat, I don't have a black and white cat. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok, at redrock_bball, and on Instagram, at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I've got a competitive side, I admit it. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. It is the mobile hit twist on a classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. Thank you. I can speak like a human, unlike when I read that part. But you know what to do. You are here to be a part of the show, to be a double banger. And I forgot how I normally intro the show. That is how weird this day has already started. I don't know what's going on. But I might as well tell you that we are free. Oh, there we go. That's what I say. We are free and available on all platforms. I'm sure that doesn't sound right, but whatever. Double bang it. That'll help. Maybe that'll get my brain back. Thumb it up, leave a comment, subscribe YouTube, follow audio, do both. Here we go. So, I thought yesterday's show wasn't enough self-flagellation when we talked about the guys that I was high on that didn't pan out. Now we're going to talk about the guys that I was low on that I shouldn't have been. And that's going to do it for us in terms of looking back at, guys who were high on and low on and what worked, what didn't work for this period. And then we go into some other types of shows. Still not sure exactly what we're going to do tomorrow. That's a great lead into tomorrow's show. But we're going to look at some stuff like maybe even a recap of buy lows and sell highs over the season. Not certain on that. But then we'll start to get into team reviews. Probably mix that up a little bit from how we've done that in the past. The NBA draft profile stuff will come after the draft lottery, so just be aware of that. We will do some early dynasty stuff. That'll come soon as well. I'm working with some dynasty people to talk dynasty coming up in the next week or so, and that's all going to be coming up. So there you go. I appreciate everyone who is listening to this stuff, and I think there is a level of use in talking about the things that we got wrong and things that we got right. Now, when I've gone through and done this, I've had very specific criteria about how I look at what is a hit, what is a miss. Basically, the way that I've looked at it has been looking at my preseason -1 rankings, the end of season -1 rankings per game, and the Yahoo ADP. I needed to be either ahead or behind of ADP by at least 6 slots. I think half a round's a fair amount. Usually I look for 10 or so to say, who am I significantly ahead of here or significantly behind? And then to see whether that worked out or not. So if I had a guy 25th and Yahoo had him 35th, then if that player then ended up either ahead of Yahoo ADP at 30, then I win. If he ends up after ADP of 35 at number 50, then I lose. And that's a fair way of doing it. Interestingly enough, out of the 4 categories that I did, I was ahead and it worked. I was behind and it worked. I was ahead and it didn't work. And now this one where I was behind ADP and it didn't work. This one had by far the fewest names that met that criteria. Most of the others had about 12 to 13 around that mark. The most was the ones where I was behind and it worked out. That had like 25 names. But this one only had 6. Only 6 names qualified for those criteria of guys that I was low on that it didn't work out. Now, you've seen the thumbnail. You've seen the audio podcast art, so you already know who at least one of these guys is. Pretty obvious who it is. But we're not going to start with him because I think probably the biggest miss, I don't know if it was the biggest one or the other one was the biggest one, but I was out on DeAaron Fox. Out massively. I had him 61st in my -1 rankings. And I looked at that. I went back and looked at it. 61st? What am I doing? Why was I so low? Well, you know that part of the reason that I was out on Fox was that when we looked at his numbers last season, he was putting up historic Shaquille O'Neal, literally no exaggeration, Shaquille O'Neal finishing numbers at the rim. I went, he won't do this. It's impossible that he would do this. He will not do it. And that was correct. He did not do that. So his field goal percentage at the rim fell way off. But then he decided for a period of time, at least to begin the year, he was going to turn into Steph Curry and hit 44% from three. And then his steal numbers jumped back up and he was excellent. Like, he was very, very good. So it's not like I was shockingly bad in terms of his projection. I had him at 25 points, but I only had him at 1.8 triples. And that's probably the thing I think that ends up costing, is that he hit 2.9 threes. The other stuff, he had 4.6 rebounds and 5.6 assists with 2.1 steals. That's the other one, is the steals really got me because I didn't have him at 2.1 steals. In fact, I had him at 1.1. So I just didn't expect that giant jump. And as we know, steals are a wildly fluctuating number year on year. There's no way, write this down, there's no way DeAaron Fox goes 2.1 steals next season. None. He could finish at 1.4 pretty easily. I think it's going to drop. And that cost me. His ADP was 38. He averaged 45 fantasy points. Now, I was pretty big on him for fantasy points leagues. I think I had him 20th in fantasy points leagues. But yeah, he was great, and I missed it very, very clearly. I missed out on DeAaron Fox. The 61 preseason -1 rank was not really reflective of where I was taking, because again, drafting in fantasy basketball was not looking at the list and going, I take him, then I take him, then I take him, then I take him. It's not really how it works. A lot of the time I was like, oh, well, I need to get Fox, but I'm not going to take him in round 3. I was never going to do that, but I should have. Big L. That's what happens. The next one is the one you know about. It's Scottie Barnes. To give myself, so I don't feel too sad, give myself a little bit of credit. In the Toronto Raptors season preview show, when I talked about a potential sleeper / breakout player, I did mention Barnes. I said I don't have real confidence in it. I don't really love him as a player. But with the absence of Van Vliet, he is going to get to do more. We saw I did a deep dive in. I think I had him under the lens in that show. And we did a deep dive into some of the numbers, saying that maybe his season the year before, where it was quite poor, wasn't as poor as the numbers showed. And there were some really standout moments that maybe it translates. But I didn't think any of this stuff. His year was very all over the place, though. He ended up 25th. I had him 77th in -1, which is obviously horrible. But again, with a lot of these ones that take these big steps forward, I find it irresponsible to go in and project gigantic rate increases across the board. And for Barnes, I would have had to double his block rate, add huge amounts onto his assist rate, 50% increase at least onto his rebound rate, improve his 3-point percentage by 12 percentage points. And that's just not something you should do. That leads to poor outcomes. And you can say, well, Josh, you projected Jordan Poole to do all these things. No, I didn't. The only thing I did with Jordan Poole was project more minutes and more shots, which I thought going from Washington or Golden State to Washington would make sense. I didn't turn him from a 30% three-point shooter into a 45% three-point shooter. I didn't turn him in from a 4-rebound guy into an 8-rebound guy. That's not what happened with that. To get Barnes to these numbers, you would have had to take significant leaps in numerous areas, and he did it very clearly. But it's a hard thing to project, and sometimes I am a little too wedded to that projection model, trying to avoid those things which it's hard to envisage that level of improvement from some random bloke, because you could pick out 5 other guys and think, well, they're going to do the same thing, and they don't. So that's why I was low on Barnes. Plus, I also just didn't think he was that good of a player. Now, I think also some of what he did this season maybe obscures the level of player he is. I'm not sure that he is as good as that early season run suggested. He had a really big struggle stretch, basically after Barrett arrived, and we saw the shooting regress way back down. And that is going to be the pressure point for next season. There are going to be a lot of people who take him round 2. In fact, I find it hard to believe that Scott Barnes won't go in the second round of drafts next season, and I think there is a decent chance that he does not live up to that. But again, I am just lower on Barnes as a general, even though I have changed my outlook on him a lot. He was super impressive. He was unbelievably important. I don't think he can be the best player on a conference finals team, but that's okay. I still think that we got to look at his season in different sort of chunks to figure out where to go. He was 19th in points leagues, averaging 44 fantasy points. His ADP was 51, so I was 2 rounds behind that. Didn't end up drafting him anywhere, and obviously he was a giant W during the season. Today's episode is it's actually just brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience That is the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, brake lights, LED headlights, roof racks, exhaust kits. Whether you're into speed, style, power, eBay Motors has always got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And if your car isn't your number one ride or die because, I guess, you have another car or maybe like you like a real person instead, well, you can still get parts for that car as well. eBay's not going to discriminate. You don't have to show blood bonds between you and your car to get those parts and get that guaranteed fit, because the part with eBay's guaranteed fit is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it is easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to US customers. Suck on that, Canada. And Australia, of course. All right. What are we going to talk about next? I think these names that I'm bringing up here, of course, you hate him. I don't hate him. I just don't think CJ McCullum's that good. Simple as that. I had CJ 107th in -1 rankings. I saw very limited sample size of CJ playing alongside Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson. We just never saw it. And my thing was, well, if we're going to assume that Ingram and Zion play a decent amount of games, and they did, that if I was a decent coach or a decent player, I would think that those two would get significantly higher priority than CJ McCullum. As it turned out, for the big chunk of the beginning of the season, CJ was like, bro, what are you doing? Like, he just kept taking all the shots. And that ruined my projection of him. He also, out of nowhere, turned into a shot blocker for the first 3 months of the season. And I blame the way the NBA was scoring those blocks, which changed about halfway through the season. Once someone brought up that Fred VanVleet was the shortest player ever to average 1 block a game, those numbers all went away. It all changed. Where CJ was averaging like 1.8 steals and 1 block a game, and usage was through the roof. It was great. And then there was a period of about 5 or 6 weeks from February onwards where CJ was honestly not rosterable. They played him under 30 minutes. His shot fell away. The defensive numbers weren't there. And he took a backseat to Ingram and Zion, as he rightfully should have. And then Ingram went down. CJ played 39 minutes a game and looked great. So that's the reason why I got CJ wrong. And I don't think that the process on getting CJ wrong was incorrect. I had him 107th. He ended up 51st. His ADP was 83. It's a gigantic miss, obviously. He averaged 35 fantasy points, but again, when I look at this, I'm not going to go in and say, well, yeah, I should have projected CJ to block shots and get steals through the start of the season. Should have predicted that. You shouldn't have. If you did, you're lying to yourself. He did it, but you shouldn't have projected it. And again, as the team sort of settled in, CJ was marginalized, again, as he should be. And we've seen also, look, there's a game today, game 2, Pelicans, Thunder. CJ just, I don't think, makes any sense completely on this team. I'd be very, very nervous about an older, smaller guard who doesn't fit on his current team in terms of future value. I don't know where he goes, but I would guess 2 more years until he's a backup, maximum. Again, you might think I just hate CJ. I just don't think it makes sense for him to be in that role. And that's part of what we look at. And part of my projection for CJ was that you will be a distant third usage player behind Zion and Ingram, when there were times when Zion was taking this insane backseat and CJ was doing everything. So, massive L, didn't pick him, didn't draft him, missed on the projection a lot. I still believe fully in the process behind the projection. That happens sometimes. Sometimes, like, you look at it, and with the Barnes one, again, I probably should have bumped his usage and assist rate higher than I did, so that's wrong, and I would adjust that. But a lot of the stuff, getting behind, like the idea behind it, I still think works out. And you should never go into any sort of fantasy situation going, well, my idea didn't work out, therefore the process was wrong. That's not how that stuff works. This guy did work out, therefore my process was right. That is a bad way of looking at it, and it's going to lead to significant mistakes in the future. I still think that the way that I approached CJ was correct. The result was obviously not, and that's a huge L. And that is going to happen every year. But I still have, again, take it with a grain of salt, because I don't believe in CJ as a long-term very good player. I don't think he's going to be able to maintain 12-team standard draftable level for 2 years max. That is it for CJ, in my opinion, which Could be wrong. This is another one, which you'll say you just hate the guy. I don't. Demar Derozan is an incredibly admirable player. He has been a guy who has stood up for mental health through the NBA. There has never been a bad word said about Demar Derozan as a player, as a person, or any of those things. But what I've always said about Derozan holds is that basically every season of his career, except I think one, his team has been better when he has been on the bench. You can say small sample size for one season. When it happens for 13 seasons, you have to go, that's a worry. That's a problem somehow. And that's not to say that DeRozan causes the problem. It's to say that building around DeMar DeRozan is very, very hard and it almost makes it impossible to do. But teams will still do it. Now, part of the reason I was down on DeRozan, I had him 59th. He ended up 45th. It's not a gigantic miss. His ADP was 47. He averaged 40.6 fantasy points, which puts him 30th. That's not a huge miss. It is a miss. It's not a huge miss. But my criticisms of DeRozan has been he can always get his numbers. He will score. He will do what he does. But he relies upon insane 2-point and mid-range shooting. He relies upon getting to the line a ton and doing that at a high rate. He relies upon the team force-feeding him a lot of shots. And to begin the year, he wasn't doing that. He actually wasn't living up to my spot of 59 to begin the year. The efficiency, as you will have noted, is down. Like, it's not where it used to be. DeRozan shot only 48% from the field. He was at 85 from the line when you're hoping for 88, and that might not seem like a big difference, but when that is the thing driving your production, that is an issue. He played 38 minutes a night, and I'll be honest, I didn't come in and say DeMar DeRozan is going to lead the NBA in minutes, so I got that wrong. But part of the reason that DeRozan was able to jump ahead and beat my number was Zach LaVine went down. And DeRozan, before LaVine was out, was not doing this. His usage went up, his minutes went up, his assist rate went up, and that pushed him into this spot. So, with the uncertainty in Chicago, is LaVine going to be there? Is DeRozan going to be there? Is Lonzo going to return? Are they going to trade Caruso? I don't know any of those things. Where does DeRozan play? If DeRozan goes anywhere else apart from Chicago, I will say almost zero chance of the top 50. Zero. I think if he stays in Chicago and LaVine and Lonzo are there, zero chance of the top 50. We already saw the drop-off in mid-range shooting and some wonkiness with some of his free throws. We already saw all that stuff. At his age as well, those minutes, he's been incredibly durable. But you have to worry. There is an aging curve and a cliff will come. So, overall, again, it's an L. If LaVine didn't get hurt, it wouldn't have been an L. I'm fairly confident in that. And I will be very comfortable. Again, it's going to depend a lot on what happens. I'll be very comfortable with DeRozan not having him top 50 again next season, despite what happened this season. I'll be very... Because you can look, I'm pretty sure he's going to be over the last 2 months, like a top... Let's go and have a look. Over the last 2 months, he's going to be like a top 30 player. And I think one of the things we've also been learning over the last 10 years that I've been doing this, each year we get a little bit more info, is that one of the things I really did used to focus on quite a bit was, hey, what happened post-All-Star break? Hey, does that carry over? And I think the answer is generally no, it doesn't. It doesn't really have any bearing on what happens as we move forward. I'm going to have a look and see if I can find DeRozan. Yep, DeRozan 31st in the final 2 months of the season. There you go. So that would suggest to you that if he ended up 45th and he was 31st last 2 months, he must have been outside the top 50, top 55 for the first 4 months. And that is exactly where I had him. And then things just ramped up and it was great. So again, I am okay with not projecting someone to play 38 minutes a night. And I'm okay with projecting that Zach LaVine doesn't play 22 games to enable his usage to boost. But he was a clear miss. I faded him. I faded him all season. And that was wrong. Very, very obviously wrong. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we need that opportunity to get things off our chest. Maybe it's me talking about why are the Pelicans featuring CJ McCullum instead of Zion Williamson. Willie Green, have you got eyes that work? Not like Joel Embiid, where only one of his eyes works, apparently, and just get that man off the court and into a hospital. But we need to get things off our chest. Maybe you're a Philadelphia fan going, can we just make sure that Joel doesn't die on the court? What is happening in these games? BetterHelp could be that outlet. It's someone unbiased in your life. That isn't what therapy has to be, but it can be a part of it. So as therapy is different for everybody, we all have different things and things that are bigger than Joel Embiid's eye or CJ McCullum's usage that we need to talk about or get off our chest. Like getting stuff off, little stuff out can be important. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online and flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That is betterhelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Today's episode is also brought to you by DoorDash Mother's Day. It is coming up right now. Well, not right now, but very, very soon. We are only a couple of weeks away from Mother's Day. And your mum likes stuff. Everyone likes stuff. But do you know the stuff your mum likes? Of course you do. You can get that stuff that your mum likes. Flowers, food, technology, whatever it is. DoorDash can get that stuff delivered to you same day. Get your mum the best Mother's Day gift that you can and get it sent with DoorDash. Maybe she's got a sweet tooth. Maybe she wants the new pair of headphones that perfectly fit onto her iPad. Maybe she wants one of those cases on her phone that flips open and has her cards at the back so it doubles as a wallet. Who knows? But with DoorDash, you can get all of those things and get them sent directly to your or her door. With a Dash Pass membership, you can save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass merchants that meet the minimum subtotal, and other fees, including service fees, apply. Terms, of course, also apply. Get a Mother's Day gift as unique as she is with DoorDash. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now on DoorDash. That is Locked On NBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. Okay. I don't know if you can see this. If you're here on the video, you might be able to. I'm going to move the microphone for a second. There you go. I've got my Fort Wayne Tin Caps t-shirt on, which is a legendary name, by the way. Imagine the NBA ran things the way that Major League Baseball does in terms of player acquisition. Not born in the US? Cool. We're just going to sign you. You don't have to go through a draft process. We're just going to just grab 17-year-old kids from India, basically the way that European teams do. Imagine the bidding frenzy on guys like Luka Doncic back when he was like 16 to try and get him across. Like the international free agency period in baseball. And I say this because my favorite prospect in baseball is Ethan Salas, who for the Padres, who plays for the Tin Caps, and he was like the number one international free agency signing the year before. Hey, shout out the Padres, getting the number one international free agent 2 years in a row, just poaching 17-year-olds. Awesome. What a weird system. But yeah, imagine basketball did that, where you could just be going out there, no draft, just like we're just going to scout wherever. And 17, come across, sit in our minor league system for 5 years, and we'll see what happens then. Well, it's a crazy system. I actually love it. And basketball would be so different if things were that way, and I'm sure you don't care. Let's go on to the next one. Shout out to the Tin Caps. This one is embarrassing. Maybe they're all embarrassing, but this one's more embarrassing because if there is one thing that I am known for, apart from being devilishly handsome and offering the cheapest and funnest mustache rides in the world, is that I love Derrick White. So why the hell was I so low on Derrick White? What happened? Part of this is because these numbers, and I had him 106th. Not going to step away from that. That's horrible. That's a massive miss. That's a huge L. Right? This happened after the Drew Holiday trade. I was like, okay, what is going to happen here? The starting lineup is Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Kristaps Porzingis, Drew Holiday, and Derrick White. And I was like, well, he's the fifth option. He's the fifth offensive option in that group. Where is his usage going to be? How is he going to ever touch the ball? And it's not just shooting or scoring. It's when does he ever get assists? Brown will have it. Tatum will have it. Holiday will be the point guard. When does White... when Smart was gone and White was the point guard, I was like, okay, that's interesting. We're going to see a big jump up here. It's not that his role or it's not that his minutes are changing because, he was the starter the year before. But then he went to a situation where he was the starter, the only guard, and then he went back to being like an off guard, in my thought, similar to how he was next to Marcus Smart, but instead next to Drew Holiday, who is better than Marcus Smart. So I was like, okay, not interested in this. I love Derrick White. I think he's an awesome player. He's a fantastic guy. One of the most underrated players in the NBA, as I've said for many, many years. And then he came out and I just looked stupid. Like, what a season from Derrick White. Now, you will look at some rankings that have him placed as like a 20th or 25th best player. Good luck. Draft him there next season. You'll lose. That's a terrible way to do it. I had him 106th. His ADP was 87. Somehow I was even behind 87, which again, I look back and I go, how was I that low? He ended up 48th in end-of-season rankings. He averaged 33 fantasy points, which placed him 68th. He did that while only still having 15 points. He hit 2.7 triples. He hit them at 40%. He had 5 assists. He had a steal. He had 1.2 blocks. 1.2 blocks. And we know he's the best shot-blocking guard in the NBA. But that's a number that I don't think you can really project, and I didn't. I didn't project that he'd be a 40% three-point shooter. And also, I didn't expect that he would have a higher usage than Jrue Holiday. And I think if you go in and even if you were higher on Derrick White than me in this draft season, which it wouldn't be hard to do, nearly everybody was, you wouldn't come in and go, yeah, no, I definitely thought he'd have more usage than Jrue. That's 100% what I thought. He would always be higher than Jrue, have better assists and have more usage and just be a better offensive player than Jrue Holiday. No one thought that. Maybe you did. You're lying, but maybe you did. Like, I don't see how you could do that. He was able to play an extra 4 minutes a game. Even on the team being as good as it was, he took his field goals from, his field goals stayed the same at 46, but his free throws improved. His assists improved. His steals jumped up by almost 50%. His blocks jumped up by 33%. Just giant increases. And I love it for Derrick. I love that we discussed him as being an all-star caliber player. I just didn't expect it to happen. I love him. I think he's great. I didn't expect it, and I whiffed on it massively. Massive whiff on Derrick White, which again is unbelievably embarrassing for me. The last one. This is one that I feel like gets me every year. The thick hogsman, Tobias Harris. I had him 97th in the preseason. Now, part of it, again, was the conundrum of James Harden. Would Harden play for the Sixers? Would somebody else come back who would have decent usage that would push Harris to be the fourth offensive option? And the answer to both of those questions was no, which, if you consider both of them 50-50 propositions, was a 25% chance of happening, which, as you're well aware, banking on a 25% chance is less likely to occur than doing the other side of it and going at a 75% chance, which is the way that I like to look at probabilities of stuff. I had Harris 97th. His ADP was 90th, so I was only a little bit behind. He ended up 75th. But I will posit this to you. Was Harris actually 75th? Like, I know he was. But I feel like for 3 months of the year, he was like not even rosterable. He was like outside the top 120, I reckon, for massive chunks of this season. So I look at these numbers and go, well, he must have put up huge numbers early on and just been a disaster towards the end of the season, which is basically accurate. He is a guy that does very little else apart from score. He doesn't ever get assists. His rebounding is poor. It used to be awesome. He's had multiple 18 rebound games when he used to play for the Magic and the Bucks. Remember when he did that? As he was like a breakout guy there. His shooting fell away significantly. He doesn't get to the line. How did he even get to this level? Well, he averaged 17 points with 6.5 rebounds. I think the thing that did happen for him is his rebounds increased as the season went on when Embiid went down. He also averaged a lot of defensive stats, more blocks early on in the season as well, and way more steals. Like, he ended up averaging a steal per game this year, Harris. But over the final 20 games, he was at 0.6. So it means he was running at 1.4 early on. And steals, they're wild. They're crazy. So, yeah, I had Harris 97th. He ended up 75th. That was a terrible decision for me early in the season. But February onwards, I reckon you're fine with it. Like, if you ended up missing him, you'd be like, I'm so glad I don't have Tobias Harris here. Because I think he struggled for most of that period. I would say there's zero chance he's back in Philadelphia next season. I don't know where he ends up. There's a lot of whispers about Detroit. Back in Detroit, he could have a solid role there. I don't know. But he's one of those guys that just is so average across the board. If you look at all of his Zed scores for all of the categories, there is not one single Zed score, traditional Zed score stuff, that is above a 1. Actually, there's only one of them that is above a 0.5. And there is none that are below a negative 0.5. Which, again, is just completely average right across the board, which is basically why he finished 75th. That's another thing, and I'm just going to talk about that quickly. I am very guilty of this. Other people who talk fantasy are as guilty or more guilty than me. People playing fantasy are guilty of it as well. We talk about rankings. I'm going to have a whole show on this at some point and the way rankings are distributed for category leagues. And we say that this guy is a negative in rebounds. This guy is a negative in steals. when all we mean is that that player is below average. Because when Z scores are created, once you are below average, that Z score becomes a negative. But if the average of rebounds is, I think it's 4.8, and you average 4.6, well, those stats display to you that, well, he's actually a negative in rebounds, which is very, 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 very clearly wrong. In a head-to-head league, you don't have to be at average at every category. Accumulation, getting numbers in, streaming guys in. If you're getting more than 0, you're actually a positive. So I can come in here and say Harris was actually a slight negative in threes, slight negative in assists, slight negative in blocks. But he wasn't. Because the guy who was no one's actually a negative in those categories because the least you can get is 0. What he was below average. And you've got ideas on this as well, but because if you want to win a Roto League, I think you need to get, on average, 9 out of 12 for a category. So I would say that puts you at about, let's say, a Z score of like a 1 to 1.1 in each category. That's sort of what you want. 70th percentile, around that mark. About a 1. Let's say a 1. So we look at guys, well, this guy's a negative and he's less than a 0 in a Z score. And that means that if you just had all of that guy on your team, you'd get a 5, which, who cares? You're not winning in Roto that way. So maybe we need to be adjusting that baseline to make it that, unless you're helping us get to a 9, then you are taking away. But in head-to-head, maybe the level of 0 needs to be replacement player. So that if the guys on your waiver wire, the highest available player averages 14 points with 2 threes, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 0.8 steals or whatever, then that becomes baseline. And anything you give over that is a positive. And that would mix a lot of stuff up, I think. Rather than if you are the 79th best player in a single category, you're considered a negative. Which I think is crazy, honestly, when there are 500 other players in the NBA who are worse than you in that category. I hope all of that makes sense. But it's all, the takeaway from that unscripted diatribe, which really isn't anything to do with Toby Harris, I'll get him off the screen, is that when you hear me or other fantasy analysts or you yourself internally monologuing and say, well, he's actually a negative in 3 categories. When you say negative, it means not top 78 in that category. We're talking 12-team leagues. It means not top half of the available player pool, of the rosterable player pool. That is what negative means, which again is a very different thing to saying you are a negative. If your average scoring is 18 points, which I believe it is, I believe that was the 0 mark for a 12-team league, 18 points, and you average 17 a game, you will be a negative in points. But let's be serious, you're not. And that is just a nomenclature thing which burns into our brain. We go, he's a negative. Is he? No, he's not. I'd love your thoughts on that little rant that when I wake up every morning and I go in the shower, which, again, you can't have access to that footage, but when I'm in there, they're the things that go through my head. I go, these things aren't right. Well, this isn't real. He's not a negative. He's still accumulating numbers. That can't be negative. We need to do better. Go ahead and double bang me. Listen on the audio, watch the video, but more importantly on the video, hit subscribe. Don't unsubscribe. Thumb it up, leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening to an unhinged tin cap rant. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.